Challenges that we face may have changed, but the things that we believe in must not. That's why we must promote our values by living them at home, which is why I have prohibited torture and will close the prison at Guantanamo Bay. And we must make it clear to every man, woman, and child around the world who lives under the dark cloud of tyranny that America will speak out on behalf of their human rights and tend to the light of freedom and justice and opportunity and respect for the dignity of all peoples.
Okay, so this was also very George W. Bush-esque language, this talk about dignity of all peoples and freedom and justice and opportunity. The reality is that in Afghanistan, we basically have three choices, and we always had three choices. One was an overwhelming surge in order to pacify the country, and maintaining that surge as long as necessary in order to pacify the country. Number two was to get out completely, just pull out completely. Right? This was sort of what Obama wanted to do, and then reality overtook him. And that's why George W. Bush and Obama, and now finally Donald Trump, a guy who campaigned on the idea that he was going to get out of Afghanistan ASAP, somebody who in 2013 was saying Afghanistan was a foolish war we never should have gotten into, now he is basically taking the same tack. All three of these presidents have decided that the only thing that we can do is muddle through. We're not willing to expend the kind of resources necessary to actually occupy the country for 60 years, Japan style or Germany style. There is no government for us to overthrow in Afghanistan in order to ensure the pacification of the population. And so we're going to have to muddle through a long counterinsurgency. And Obama eventually ended up coming to that conclusion, and now President Trump has come to that conclusion as well. Now, what President Trump did do is he is militating some of that policy. So he's changing some of the mistakes that Obama made. And he's getting a lot of flack on the right for this. He's getting a lot of flack, as I said, from Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson and the folks over at Breitbart. There was even a piece over at Breitbart today by a columnist named Brian Darling suggested that if he had known that Trump was going to do what he said last night, he might not have voted for him in the first place. I think that this is neglecting the fact that Afghanistan was the source of al-Qaeda that attacked us on 9/11, that if we were to leave these people to their own devices, they would quickly rebuild the terrorist bases that would be used to strike at the heart of the United States. And the rip on President Trump from the right is unrealistic. I think it's the isolationist right and the isolationist left. I think this is unrealistic. It's Clintonian foreign policy. We tried it during Bill Clinton's era. This hands off, leave them alone, they're not bothering us. And the result was the USS Cole and the bombings in Kenya and Tanzania and 9/11, of course. The fact is that while it is unpopular to say this, the war on terror has been largely successful in terms of reducing major terrorist attacks in the West. Okay, we haven't seen anything remotely approaching a 9/11 since 9/11. We've seen small-scale terror attacks from people who have been recruited through the internet by ISIS, but that is not of the same size and scope as the fully planned cell-based terror attacks that al-Qaeda was pursuing in the lead up to 9/11 and then including 9/11 itself. So Trump looks at this and he gets into office and his generals tell him, look, Mr. President, you can talk all you want about pulling out of Afghanistan, but the fact of the matter is that you are going to have to be responsible for whatever comes next. And I thought that Trump actually did an admirable job last night of doing something I've never seen him do before, explaining why he changed his mind. He led off his speech after making some statements about American unity and unity of the armed forces, which was obviously an attempt to tamp down a lot of the anger over Charlottesville. President Trump said this about having changed his opinions on Afghanistan. This is clip one.
My original instinct was to pull out. And historically, I like following my instincts. But all my life, I've heard that decisions are much different when you sit behind the desk in the Oval Office. In other words, when you're president of the United States. So I studied Afghanistan in great detail and from every conceivable angle. After many meetings over many months, we held our final meeting last Friday at Camp David with my cabinet and generals to complete our strategy.
This is the first time I've ever seen President Trump actually go back on something and acknowledge that new evidence had changed his mind. I think that that's a good thing. I'd like to see more of this from President Trump in different areas of his governance where he says, listen, I used to say a lot of things, and some of those things were right, and some of those things were wrong. I have instincts. I think they're pretty good. But when I see new evidence, I have to change my opinion. So good for President Trump for doing that. We'll talk about what his policy is and how it differs from President Obama's, because there are some significant similarities to President Obama's speeches and talks and policies in Afghanistan, but there are some pretty significant differences as well, I think mostly in the right direction. Before I do that, I first want to say thank you to our sponsors over at My Patriot Supply. So if you're looking at the world right now, and it seems like a chaotic place, if you're looking at the nuclear buildup in North Korea, if you're looking at Iran developing a nuclear weapon, if you're looking at Russia looking to make moves in the world markets and pushing into areas like Ukraine, if you're looking at China, which is getting more and more involved in antagonistic activity toward the United States, or if you're just looking around and you're saying, hey, there are natural disasters every day, you ought to be prepared, okay? This is why you need a food supply in your house. In California, we have earthquakes. The government recommends that you actually have a food supply in your house in case something happens. You can't get to the grocery store. The grocery stores are cleared out. The government can't help you. This is why you need independence, and that's what the My Patriot Supply Survival Food Supply is for. For $99, you get 102 servings of breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. That's less than $1 per serving. Order now at 888-803-1413, 888-803-1413, or online at preparewithben.com. That's preparewithben.com. It's not a big deal, folks. $99 gets you 102 servings. You're protected. Your family's protected. My Patriot Supply believes in old-fashioned values, and they are people that I would trust to get me the food that I need. Everybody in the office, by the way, who's tried their food has said that it tastes just like home cooking. 888-803-1413, preparewithben.com, preparewithben.com. Make sure that your family is safe and taken care of and you don't have to worry about disaster striking because you're the only one on your block who's prepared. Preparewithben.com, 888-803-1413. Okay, so number one, Trump says that he's actually thought this thing through. This, again, is a major difference from a lot of his other policies where it seems like he's just going off the cuff. Then Trump says that he calls for victory. The problem that I have with Trump calling for a quote-unquote victory is that whenever, Trump made a big deal during his campaign about saying, we never win anymore. People, we never win, ever. No winning, ever. We haven't won. Okay, the problem is, and we're not going to get victory in Afghanistan the same way that we got victory in Germany or Japan. Because, there is no government to surrender to us. The Taliban are not going to surrender to us. They will just continue to break down into smaller and smaller terrorist groups. So when you say victory, the American people expect the ticker tape parade down the middle of Fifth Avenue. The American people demand a surrender document signed on the deck of a boat. Okay, none of that's ever going to happen. When he says we're going to achieve victory, then he needs to define what victory is. Here is Trump talking about what victory looks like to him.
First, our nation must seek an honorable and enduring outcome worthy of the tremendous sacrifices that have been made, especially the sacrifices of lives. The men and women who serve our nation in combat deserve a plan for victory. They deserve the tools they need and the trust they have earned to fight and to win. From now on, victory will have a clear definition: attacking our enemies, obliterating ISIS, crushing al-Qaeda, preventing the Taliban from taking over Afghanistan, and stopping mass terror attacks against America before they emerge.
Okay, the problem with this particular definition of victory is it's exactly the same, almost word for word. President Obama's definition of victory or George W. Bush's definition of victory. There is no victory moment, right? There is no win here where we say, okay, we've accomplished our goals, now we're leaving. Okay, what he's talking about is a long-range occupation. Okay, this is what John McCain said in 2008 about Afghanistan. He said, look, you want to pacify it, you're going to have to stay there for 50 years. That's basically what Trump is talking about here, but he doesn't want to admit it openly. Okay, what he really should be saying is, look, victory is us preventing terror attacks. That's what he's saying here, right? Attacking our enemies, preventing terrorist attacks. But there is not going to be a moment of victory. The American people have to understand our military is there to do just this. Our military is there to prevent these things. There's not going to be, expectations of the big ticker tape parade are not realistic. And I think that because Trump had sort of pushed that expectation of victory in Afghanistan for so long, it's difficult now for him to back off that language, even though there's not going to be the iconic victory moment that people are looking forward to. There is a difference in some of his rhetoric from President Obama. So he is refusing, obviously, to pull out. Unlike Obama, who said we're going to pull out after a certain period of time, getting out is the most important thing. He got a lot of criticism for this, Obama, and I think rightly so, because the mission has to be defined by what our goals are, not by your political goals in getting out as fast as possible. What Trump did yesterday actually took a fair bit of political courage. He said, listen, we're going to stay there because we need to be there, and I think that's right. Here he is saying that we cannot just pull out.
A hasty withdrawal would create a vacuum that terrorists including ISIS and al-Qaeda, would instantly fill, just as happened before September 11th.
Okay, and he is right about that, of course. He then goes on to talk about Pakistan. So remember, President Obama talked about how Pakistan was going to be our new friend. They were going to help us in the war on terror. Trump said no such thing. He said, listen, Pakistan is not being very helpful, and that's why we're going to build up democratic allies like India. I think this is a very important thing, what Trump did here. India is a democratic bulwark and an anti-Islamist bulwark against countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan. Building them up in opposition to the Pakistani government is something the United States should have been doing long ago. What can India do against Pakistan in terms of tamping down terror? Not much, but we can at least create allies in the region who are interested in working with us to tamp down terror, particularly along the India-Pakistan border. That's a good thing. Pakistan should be intimidated that if they don't do what we want, there would be serious consequences, and those consequences may not come directly from us, but may come from our allies. Here's Trump directly calling out Pakistan.
We can no longer be silent about Pakistan's safe havens for terrorist organizations, the Taliban, and other groups that pose a threat to the region and beyond. Pakistan has much to gain from partnering with our effort in Afghanistan. It has much to lose by continuing to harbor criminals and terrorists.
Now, the most important thing Trump did last night is he talked about timelines. You remember, I just showed you the clip of Obama saying we're going to throw 30,000 troops in, and 18 months they'll be out. Really stupid, okay? That's like saying to your child, I'm going to give you a timeout, but the timeout's going to end in 3 minutes. Okay, you can't do that. Your kid's just going to wait out the timeout. When you give a kid a timeout, the idea is that the timeout is indefinite until the kid does what you want. When it comes to the Taliban, you have to throw troops in there for as long as it takes, and that's what Trump had the courage to say last night. Good for him. Here he is talking about this idea that the time-based approach needs to be gone, and instead we are going to make an approach based on the conditions on the ground.
A core pillar of our new strategy is a shift from a time-based approach to one based on conditions. We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. Conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timetables, will guide our strategy from now on. America's enemies must never know our plans or believe they can wait us out. I will not say when we are going to attack, but attack we will.
Okay, so good for him. Again, I agree that when it comes to arbitrary deadlines, that's foolishness. It's exactly the sort of arbitrary deadlines that we used to set in Vietnam. And I'll bet you a lot of what he is saying right now comes from H.R. McMaster, his national security advisor. H.R. McMaster wrote a very good book called Dereliction of Duty about American military policy in Vietnam. And one of his great critiques was this idea of graduated escalation, which was pushed by Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense under JFK and then later under LBJ. This idea that we are going to gradually, slowly increase the number of troops and announce every time how many troops we were adding to the battlefield, telling the Viet Cong exactly what sort of opposition they were going to face. H.R. McMaster says, listen, you go in and you do what you have to do, but you don't give signals to your enemies and you don't tell them when you're pulling in and pulling out. That seems to me eminently correct. Now, here's something that I think is wrong. Okay, Trump says he leaves the door open to negotiations with the Taliban. I think this is a big mistake. This is something that Obama pursued, but W didn't. This idea that the Taliban will come to the table. In fact, Obama actually set up an office in Qatar so that he could talk with the Taliban. That did not do anything except make the Taliban more determined to reinforce its own positions in Afghanistan so they'd have a stronger negotiating position at the table. Here's Trump opening the door to this.
Someday, after an effective military effort, perhaps it will be possible to have a political settlement that includes elements of the Taliban in Afghanistan. But nobody knows if or when that will ever happen.
Okay, well, still, you shouldn't be leaving that on the table. If you don't want to negotiate with them, don't talk about negotiating with them. A couple more points, and I think these are good on Trump in 1 second. But first, I want to say thank you to our sponsors over at Realty Shares. So this is not an offering of securities. Private investments are highly illiquid and risky, not suitable for all investors. Past performance not indicative of future results. Securities offered to accredited investors through North Capital Private Securities member FINRA SIPC. So you're interested in investing in real estate, but you don't know how. You don't know what the good investment looks like. And you don't have $100,000 to just drop on a condo right now. Well, that is exactly what Realty Shares is for. REALTY shares.com. They got rid of the walls between you and real estate investing. You don't need billions, millions, or even tens of thousands of dollars to invest in vetted real estate assets. With Realty Shares, the way that it works is that they vet all of these properties, and then hundreds of people invest fractionally, reducing the cost of an initial investment. For just $5,000, you can start investing in properties. It's free to sign up and browse the investments at realtyshares.com/Ben. Getting set up takes just a few minutes, and then you can manage and invest directly from your phone or computer through their simple and secure online process. If you make $200,000 a year, you may qualify. Find out today at realtyshares.com/Ben. That's realtyshares.com/Ben. And right now, if you sign up using that special code realtyshares.com/Ben, you get $100 toward your first investment today. That's $100 toward your first investment, so it's $4,900 to invest in your first property instead of $5,000. realtyshares.com/Ben for your first investment. Again, it's a great way to get into real estate investing. You should certainly be looking at investing your money. If it's just sitting there in the bank, it's not doing any good. Make sure that you're investing the way you need to in order to ensure that your financial goals are met over the course of your lifetime. realtyshares.com/Ben. Okay, so back to President Trump. He dropped this little note that was sort of different from both W and Obama. He said, we're not nation building. So these are keywords. You know, when these are sort of buzzwords, they don't mean a whole hell of a lot, but it was supposed to appease his more populist, nationalist, isolationist base. Here's Trump talking about Afghan responsibility. Here's what he had to say.
We are not nation building again. We are killing terrorists. We will no longer use American military might to construct democracies in faraway lands or try to rebuild other countries in our own image. Those days are now over. Instead, we will work with allies and partners to protect our shared interests. We are not asking others to change their way of life, but to pursue common goals that allow our children to live better and safer lives. This principled realism will guide our decisions moving forward.
Okay, the reality of the situation, however, is that when he says we're not going to nation build, we are going to continue building up Afghanistan's security forces. It doesn't mean we have to build schools for them, but it does mean that we have to build up their security forces so that they can kill terrorists, and then they can use their resources to build schools. So this idea that we're not nation building, it's a little bit of a false divide. Okay, when you go in and you build up a nation's security forces to ensure their government is stable enough to take care of terrorism, that is, in fact, nation building. The best thing I think that Trump did in this speech is he said we're changing the rules of engagement. President Obama was very strong on the idea that he was going to, in top-down fashion, control the rules of engagement in Afghanistan. He was going to prevent our troops from being able to open fire on people if they'd hidden their guns. So there'd be situations where there'd be a terrorist and he would know that there were soldiers watching him. He'd drop his gun behind a car and run across the street, and our soldiers were told, okay, don't shoot at that guy because he doesn't have a gun, even though they'd seen him with the gun 1 second beforehand. Trump says, I'm going to relieve a lot of these rules of engagement and free our troops to do what they need to do. Military commanders are now in charge. This is good stuff.
Finally, my administration will ensure that you, the brave defenders of the American people, will have the necessary tools and rules of engagement to make this strategy work and work effectively and work quickly. I have already lifted restrictions the previous administration placed on our warfighters that prevented the Secretary of Defense and our commanders in the field from fully and swiftly waging battle against the enemy. Micromanagement from Washington, D.C. does not win battles.
Okay, good for Trump. This is, I think, the most important point. And this is, by the way, why we're winning against ISIS. It's not because we've dumped in an enormous number of additional resources. It's because Trump has taken the handcuffs off of our military commanders. That's really good stuff. So I want to talk about the blowback from the right that you're seeing from people like Tucker Carlson, why I think it's misguided, why I think that they're wrong, and why Trump, I think, is right. 4,000 troops may not be enough, but at least his reorientation towards the idea that he is going to push for a longer counterterrorism strategy in Afghanistan rather than just a unilateral pullout, I think that's correct. But we'll talk about the blowback that he's received. We'll also deconstruct some culture. We have a pretty epic deconstruction of culture today, so we'll do all of that. But first, you have to go over to dailywire.com and subscribe. We are a video show, not just an audio show. If you want to watch us live, $9.99 a month ensures that you can watch the entire show live. You don't have to wait until we post it later. And you can also, later, if you become a subscriber, when we do post the show later, we remove the ads, so you get the entire show completely straight through. You also get to be part of our mailbag. You get to watch the Andrew Klavan show live beginning beginning at 10:30 a.m. this morning Pacific time. You get to watch the Michael Knowles Show beginning at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time today. You get to be part of their mailbags as well. So we have lots of material for you over at dailywire.com. Go over and check it out. Annual subscribers get all of those things, plus this, the most magnificent of all tumblers, far better than the Louder with Crowder hand-etched mug. This, the Leftist Tears hot or cold tumbler. I've held them both in my hands. Okay, there's no comparison. Sorry, Stephen. There's no comparison. It's just a magnificent piece of work. I mean, this is something that you'll treasure all your life. It is something that thousands of years from now, when they dig up the relics of an ancient civilization, this will be the only thing where they think this must have been some sort of god that the ancients worshipped. This Leftist Tier hot or cold tumbler, you get that with $99 annual subscription. Make sure you go over and subscribe right now. And also make sure that you go over to iTunes or SoundCloud and subscribe and leave us a review. We are fastest growing, largest conservative podcast in the nation.